So we are in session 13 of our study of the Acts of the Apostles, and we're looking at chapters 15 and 16, the Council of Jerusalem, and the second missionary journey of Paul. But today I'm going to do something a little bit different, and next week as well, is like more to have like a character study. So I want to zoom in on one little personality. And today I want to look at Saint Timothy. Timothy was a close associate of Paul. But when you get to know characters like this in the Bible, it's really inspiring. And especially that we don't always know much about certain characters, but Timothy, we actually know a lot through the letters and through the Acts. We see where he comes from, his personality, what Paul was asking of him. And Timothy was in present-day Turkey. And in Paul's first missionary journey, he met his mum and his grandmother, and they were converted. On the second missionary journey, we're going to see Paul sees that Timothy has grown. He has become convert himself, he has matured, and Timothy asked Paul, can I follow you and help out on this missionary journey you're about to embark on? Now, I really like Timothy because he's like the MacGyver. You know, those of you who knew TV in the 80s, MacGyver could fix anything with sellotape and thumbtacks. When there was a crisis or something difficult, he would send in Timothy to do this. Now, Luke was a very close associate of Paul, always by his side for medical reasons, but also just for security and friendship. Luke was with Paul all the time, as a scribe as well. While Timothy was more like sent out into mission. Whenever Paul couldn't go somewhere to straighten things out, he would send his son. He would call him his son, my child. Every time there's a reference to Timothy, you can see the great love that Paul has for him because he calls him his son and his child. I don't know if you know the movie Pulp Fiction, but there's a guy in there called Mr. Wolf, and he's sent in whenever there's a crisis. Timothy was like a postman as well. He would send letters, and when Timothy would send the letter that Paul had given him, sometimes it would take 40 days to get there to the place and 40 days to come back. So it wasn't just like dropping a letter in the post box. It was a journey. It was like an expedition, so to speak. And I think Paul was a mentor to Timothy. So if Timothy was 25, Paul was the age of Christ, so about 50 when Timothy received his calling. Okay. Now we know that during Paul's first missionary journey, he went to a place called Lystra. And Lystra is in present-day Turkey. And there, Paul didn't really do much other than being beaten up. Because often there was a case with Paul, was he would go into a city, he would preach the gospel, get beaten up, and be smuggled out. And you think, well, that wasn't very successful. But actually, despite the visible failure, he touched the hearts of two people, Eunice and Lois, who were the mother and grandmother of Timothy. So what Paul would do is he would plant seeds and come back 2 years later, plant more seeds, create leadership, build a little community and structure, leave and come back in another year or two and keep strengthening. And with people like Timothy and other leaders, he would send them as well to strengthen these communities. So when he came back the second time, we see that Paul sees that Timothy has grown and is eager to serve and is wise and is a man who can fix anything, a situation or whatever it be, and that he's also gentle, and he's also somebody who can help people to reconcile. Now, Paul does say that he is a little on the shy side, and there's a moment as well where Paul says, don't be put off by your age, Timothy. Be courageous, because Timothy sometimes probably had to minister to people who were much older than he was. Now, some of the most moving writings in the New Testament are the Timothy 1 and 2, the letters to Timothy. And why is that? Because they were the very last letters that Paul wrote. And he wrote them in the Mamertine prison in 68 AD, roughly, in Rome. And Paul writes them to Timothy, and they're kind of like his testament, really. And you can see again his love of Timothy and his admiration of the work that Timothy does. So it's a personal letter to Timothy. He knows that his time is up. And as he closes his letter, he says in chapter 4, do your best to come to me quickly. He says, only Luke is here with me, but you come. And bring Mark with you, John Mark with you. You can see there's a reconciliation there as well. Remember, Barnabas and Paul had a problem because Barnabas wanted to bring John Mark with him, but Paul was very tough on John Mark. And so we can see that Paul has grown there, but now 68 AD. So Barnabas was right. Mark needed a kind of a maturing and mentoring. I think this is a good indication of mentoring. We're all called to mentor in the sense that people we know who are beginning their journey in the faith, to help them out and to walk with them. And if you like, Barnabas mentored Mark, Paul mentored Timothy. Now, Timothy would not have survived under Barnabas, because Barnabas was more like a collegial manager, he was a tender mentor, if you like, while Paul was more like a top-down manager, and Timothy was very autonomous. He just needed, tell me what to do, and I'll do it, more like a military obedience, while as Mark needed encouragement. Remember, Barnabas was the son of encouragement. And Mark would not have survived under the mentorship of Paul, because Paul would have broken Mark, because he was too tough on him. Mark needed encouragement. It's incredible to see the personalities and how the New Testament writings reveal the struggles and the personalities and the journeys and the maturing of each of the characters. And I find that really interesting. So we see then that Timothy sets off with Paul. But there's only one issue, is that Timothy is of mixed race. So when they get to Lystra and Timothy wants to follow Paul, Paul realizes that Timothy is half Greek, half Jewish. And he received his faith through his mother and his grandmother, but his father was a Jew, was a Greek. And as you know, the Jewish people want their sons to be circumcised. And of course, Timothy's father refuses this. So Timothy is not circumcised. Now you might say, wasn't there just like a council to say that there's no point in getting circumcised? That is true, because Silas, who was a companion of Paul at this time, was not circumcised because he was a Gentile. While as Paul would always begin his missions in the synagogues. And if he was refused there, he would go to the markets, squares, and preach. But he always started in the synagogue. And to get into the synagogue, you had to be circumcised. So Paul circumcises Timothy, which is not an easy thing at a certain age, and so that they can have access to the synagogues. And that's an interesting point. So they set off anyway, and very quickly after this, they're going to meet Luke. So what an amazing team. You have Paul, Silas, Luke, Timothy, and next week I'll speak to you a little bit about some of the female companions of the group as well, which is also very interesting. But I just want to finish now with this beautiful testimony that Paul has to Timothy. You can see he loved him really. And there's one moment where Paul is just about to be judged. The final decision is about to be taken upon him in the imperial court. And he wrote to the Philippians, okay, so as soon as he knew the outcome. And so he would send Timothy to give them the news, and then for Timothy to bring back their news to him and their reaction to him. And it's at this point that he gives Timothy quite a remarkable tribute. And this famous letter to the Philippians was delivered by Timothy. It's amazing. So I have no one like him who will be genuinely anxious for your welfare. They all look after their own interests, none of those of Jesus Christ. But Timothy's worth you know, how as a son with a father he has served with me in the gospel. So if Timothy is actually Paul's postman for this letter, he must have blushed when he read some of these words because they were very complimentary. And again, this journey from where Paul was to where Philippi was a month's journey and a very dangerous journey. And he knew that Timothy could be the man to send. And we can see whether it be in Thessalonica or in other areas, in Corinth and in Ephesus, when Paul couldn't go somewhere and there was a crisis, he would send Timothy, his beloved son, his mentor. And actually, Timothy was being prepared to replace Paul. He's replaced because he was half his age. And as Paul got older, you can see Timothy is coming into the fore as the main missionary leader. And so all the affection which a father could feel for a like-minded son, Paul felt for Timothy. And in return, he received from Timothy all the service and devotion. Timothy was completely devoted to God, but also to Paul. So I think it's just interesting, a little quick Snapchat of this amazing little young man, Timothy, whose life changed. He could have been a very wealthy and successful merchant with his family. He decided to follow Paul's footsteps, to follow Christ at the service of the gospel. And he was a blessing to Paul and a blessing to us, because a lot of the New Testament is here because of Timothy, of his faithful service, of his love of the gospel, of his patience and goodness and kindness and great leadership skills. And I think it inspires us as well to work together in the announcement of the good news.